Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rodrigues. I maintain the KVM set of tests, which is known as KVM Autotest. And today I'm going to talk about some of the initiatives we've been taking to make KVM Autotest more useful for KVM developers. So we're going to talk a little bit about software usability, very briefly. Discuss about some usability problems that we've had with KVM Autotest. The initiatives we are taking to improve the situation, the current situation, and how to contribute, how you guys can make our life better by telling us what you would like to see in KVM Autotest, and we will be more than happy to implement those comments. So for software usability, in very simple layman terms, usability is the perceived ease of use of a human-made design. So you have a design, and we are measuring how a human being is interacting with this design. The hard thing about it is that it's a non-objective measure. So when we are talking about something that is not objective, it's really complicated because lots of times we're talking about things like personal taste, and it's really hard to get a final call on how to determine the usability of a given human-made design. But so we're interested in measuring learnability, how easy it is for people to learn and understand that design and accomplish some basic tasks. Are those users able to perform those tasks efficiently? And so we're measuring efficiency. Memorability, how easy it is for a user to reestablish proficiency. Sometimes you stop using that tool, and when you need to get back to that tool, how easy it is to start using it proficiently again. And one very important thing about errors. What kinds of errors the users will make when using that design? How severe are them, and how easily they can recover from those errors? We all know that when you're trying a new tool, a new software tool, if the first experience is very frustrating, the person will have a hard time on getting back to that design. So it's very important that we as designers try to make our software without tripping points, ideally, but that's usually not possible. So we will try at least to minimize those tripping points. And how pleasant it is to use this design, how easily this design will incorporate in your workflow. So here we have a problem. KVM Autotest is the automated test regression system made for KVM, and it does not only automate regression testing, it does a lot of other stuff. And it's got a lot of interesting features. For example, KVM Autotest is able to install guest operating systems, and I mean lots of them, in an efficient way. So you can automate some very cumbersome procedures in the sense that they involve a lot of manual setup. So let's say I want to install a Windows 7 VM, and I want that VM to be installed with the latest virtual drivers. Of course, for a single developer, it's easy enough to fire up Virt Manager or anything like that, or raw QEMU KVM, and do that. But if you are looking for reliable and consistent and timely testing, this obviously becomes non-scalable. So with KVM Autotest, we can do that. We can also reproduce hard-to-hit issues because we can just let the computer executing the tests over and over until we hit some particular issue. KVM Autotest also offers things like automatic collection of commands executed, so you see what's being executed and the outputs of all commands executed on a guest. You also get serial console. So let's say that during a migration test, your guest just panicked. It's possible to catch kernel crashes, at least for the Linux platform now, but we are figuring out a way to determine it for Windows guests. If you're running KVM Autotest on a test grid model, that means a user goes to a web interface, schedules a test job, and waits for KVM Autotest to install and run the test, you can get even the host install automated. That's very important to get consistent results. So every time we're installing a new host, we're doing it the same way. And we don't need to worry about the sanity of the internal consistency of that guest, because we're always getting the same host. And this is all awesome, right? But unfortunately, it's worth nothing, or the value of this whole proposition is much smaller if the users, the KVM developers, can't use it. So it's a complicated situation. So over the time and hearing all the reports that we've got from people trying to use KVM Autotest, what we see is there's a fundamental use clash between use cases. So when we are doing usability reports, we often refer to the concept of a persona. So it's a user trying to accomplish tasks on a given system. And well, we came up with two personas for KVM Autotest usage. One is KVM QA, so it's the QA engineer working on KVM. That person needs to provide this automated and fully regular testing of the code base. All the tests need to be executed without human intervention. So we have a very large test matrix, and the test can take like hours to execute, like 16, 20 hours, days maybe. That engineer is in charge of preparing the system to pull source code, to build that source code, or install, or whatever, install packages from a build system and run all the tests. And well, more importantly, that engineer is dedicated to write, build, and manage all these infrastructures. So for that person, learning curve isn't exactly a problem, because that person is supposed to be doing that anyway. And we have another persona, and we see that the requirements for each one of these use cases are quite different. Let's see the person developing QEMU KVM and KVM kernel code. So the person is hacking on new features, is building new features into QEMU KVM and in the kernel, is doing a lot of bug fixing. Often that person needs to know whether his or her changes did break functionality. So, and that person has enough work chasing the bugs on the tools he's contributing to. So it's a trade-off that the person makes. The person has to keep on his or her mind a lot of knowledge about the internals of QEMU KVM and KVM, and that's a lot of stuff. So usually you don't want to learn yet another tool, let alone if that tool is hard to use. So for the first case, we have KVM Autotest developed, and it does a lot of stuff. So for most people who work with test automation, they look and say, oh, this is very cool, and it is, but for the QA engineer case. For the research and development, we have this fundamental problem. For that person, it's just yet another tool, and well, do I have to learn it? And hey, it blew on my face, what should I do? Well, for that persona, for that use case, a single command line tool would be the goal. And of course, we would like to provide that, and we're looking into that, but we are not sure if that's possible at all. And one of the main things that people tend to hate about KVM Autotest when they start using it is one little thing that we call the Cartesian product config file, which is a configuration file format that we have developed to describe in very concise terms a really, really large test matrix. So with this config format, we have a matrix of tests to be executed. We do have a parser to generate that matrix. So admittedly, the files, the config files are very large and very scary and very intimidating, but they generate over 500,000 test combinations. So the Cartesian config has its merits. At first, when you look at it and say, huh, what is this? It's weird. I've never seen anything like that. But it actually makes sense for the QA case I was describing. However, with time we're realizing it's showing up to be cumbersome to be used for what we call the research and development case. So for the single developer working on QEMU KVM and KVM kernel code, it's kind of complicated to learn this Cartesian config file just to run a handful of tests, just to see if the changes that he made didn't break anything. So what we plan on do about it, we are currently rethinking the research and development use case. We have some ideas and we want to propose a back to Autotest basics, because what happens is this configuration system, what it does is generate a large list of dictionaries, Python dictionaries, that describe all the parameters we're passing to the tests. Well, a good thing about KVM Autotest, a good and bad thing at the same time, is that it's highly configurable. So there are lots and lots and lots of knobs that the user can tweak. So to pass all this information that can change depending on what you do to the configuration file, we have this config file format, and what it does is provides a list of dictionaries. And each one of these dictionaries inside our control file, we will generate a sequence of simple operations. Hey, Autotest, run this test with these parameters. Run this test with these parameters. So we want to propose, but of course, we are still wanting to get some feedback on that, to generate, to teach users how to write their own control files that will be hopefully simpler to understand, and we can completely bypass the Cartesian config. So another important thing to consider about KVM Autotest is, okay, let's say the user don't want to use the tool on his or her laptop. So what happens then? Okay, that's in my own opinion, that's fine. But let's say that person is working on a KVM feature, device assignment or anything like that. We would like to write tests for that feature. And in an ideal world, the developer should be able to write a new test and add a new test to Autotest easily. Or less optimal scenario, we write a new test and the developer looks at the test and says, okay, this is reasonable, I'm okay with this test, or you could do this or that on the test and make it better. So in any case, we would like people to be able to do some work in KVM Autotest. In the worst case scenario, just look at the code and review the code and give good comments on it. So what we are doing to improve the usability of this design then? First of all, to avoid user frustration, we are trying to implement some very sane defaults on KVM Autotest. Some would say maybe useless because it's like just a VM boot and a VM shutdown. But if we try to do something fancier, so it's that useful for whom? And maybe that test requires some extra setup that is difficult for a user to come up with. So we try to put same defaults, minimize tripping points of failure, improve reporting out of the box. So when you're running Autotest on your laptop, you get a nice HTML report. Of course, we try to keep the test stable. So if you're going to try Autotest, even from the development branch, from the Git repo, you should be able to run it. We try to make it stable, so you run it and there are no really bad bugs on it. Documentation, so lots of it. We are trying now to document KVM Autotest as much as we can, and now every week we are trying to publish what we call a tip of the week, which is a documentation explaining how to accomplish a given action in KVM Autotest. So every week we have that published, and we're getting some actually good feedback about them. And well, the most important thing for me is conversation, and have lots of it, so people can express their frustrations about KVM Autotest. So we are really committed to make things better for you guys, because we believe that KVM Autotest is a very useful tool, and we want you guys to use it. You might not be running it in your laptop, but at least be able to look at it and look at a given test and say this is good or this is not good. Okay? So about what we're doing about saying defaults. In the old times, we used to run a release build test, which was to pick up the tarballs that Avi used to publish for every KVM release and try to use that. But you know, sometimes the user was missing the right packages to run it, and there was some little problem during the compilation time, and it blew on the user's face and say, hey, I can't get even started. So let's just use the pre-installed QEMU-KVM the person has. And by default, it runs the /usr bin KVM, right? QEMU-KVM. Do the installation of a single and widely available guest OS, which in this case is Fedora 15. So KVM Autotest by default will ask you, hey, do you want to download the Fedora 15 ISO? Then a KVM Autotest would go and install a guest, because we believe guest install is a good functional test. Pick up this VM, just boot it and shut it down. So is it complex? Is it useful? Maybe not, but it shows it's something that people can run and see, okay, now I see it's booting the guest. All right, now it's shutting down, and that's it. So what happened? How can I change my tests? So with a first good experience with KVM Autotest, I think users are more likely to see, okay, now how do I run migration tests? And then the person will go to the configuration file and modify the configuration file. In an area where we can improve is the sample config file comments. We could have the config file more commented, so people can look, okay, oh, this parameter does this and this parameter does that, and we're currently working on that. About minimizing points of failure, minimizing the tripping points. First of all, let's say we have some optional functionality. If it's not needed, we won't require it from the user. So in the event that the user doesn't have a given package installed, it degrades gracefully. So it says, oh, hey, we can do this, but I see you don't have this package installed. So if you want to get that, please install this package. It's very different than have a boom, oh, what happened? I have no idea what happened. So some things that we have done. We used to require KVM stat. While the tests were executed, it could generate a very nice KVM stat profiling file that was taken while running the test. We can convert the VM screenshots from PNM files to JPEG files, but that needs a third-party Python library. So if that's not available, we just tell the user, okay, we see you don't have that. If you want, please install this package. So the whole idea is to minimize obligatory dependencies. So as many dependencies as possible. About reporting. So your KVM Autotest was executed, it ended, it didn't blow on your face, but now what? I saw a lot of weird messages, debug messages, and it's trying to log on the VM, and I see a lot of weird stuff. What happened? Which test passed? Which did not pass? How do I know the difference? So we try to not depend on the Autotest web interface, which is the thing that you will get when you're using Autotest as a service, and generate a simple job report HTML file. So we try to make it default for upstream Autotest. So every single client job that you run in Autotest nowadays will generate this fancy HTML report. It has a lot of JavaScript Ajaxy things to spice up something, so you can you see the report. Unfortunately, I had my laptop with me, and I would show you how those reports look like. Unfortunately, it's not working. So this is what we are doing. So the user would just point the browser to this job report and see, okay, this pass failed, this test passed, and the necessary debug information. And about documentation, like I just mentioned, we have this Tips of the Week series, and we have how-tos. The last how-to we've made was how to write a KVM Autotest test, and that generated a lot of insightful comments and things that we're thinking about. And mostly this is what is motivating this sort of presentation that we're making. First week we talked about how to install virtual drivers using KVM Autotest, Windows virtual drivers, that said. Running the QEMU KVM unit test, so you can just use KVM Autotest and it will just go and build QEMU KVM and run all the unit tests for you, with very few hassle involved. People were asking us, so what about if I have a existing guest? And then we talked about running tests with an existing guest. And on the fourth week, like I said, the documentation was writing your own tests. So it's something fairly recent. We started like a month ago, but we believe this is being useful for people to understand the big picture. What Autotest is, how KVM Autotest fits on this scenario. So for the next weeks, you name it. You tell me what you need, what you would like to see covered for future Tips of the Week. So further work, what we're planning to do in the future. So at the end of this presentation, I'm expected to get some comments and what you would like to see. But ultimately, we would really like to have something like a make autotest target. So the user just types make autotest and it does at least a hopefully simple set of tests. And then the user can go from there without having to even know where the Git repo is and stuff like that. But the problem is we don't really know whether this is possible or not. I have some ideas. It should be possible to do this simple test execution. So at least on the feasibility side, having a simple thing might be possible, but my question is it useful? People will actually, this will make people's life actually better. So what I was thinking is to call text menu, helper menu, and help the user to configure some few questions or assume some defaults. So, but needs more thinking, and I need some input on whether this would be useful for you guys or not. Like I've said, the same way to bypass the Cartesian config system. So if it's causing that much problem, then we can bypass it for the single developer use case. So, and any questions so far, folks? Yes.
I've got lots of questions.
Sure.
So one of the things I think is really cool about Autotest is the fact that it can harness existing tests. And I mean, a lot of the cool stuff in Autotest is it calling out to other things. Mm-hmm. Have you thought about trying to separate out some of the actual tests in KVM Autotest to be standalone executables without requiring the Autotest framework?
What we do is to run existing Autotest tests inside the guest, and those tests are existing test suites that you could just uncompress the tarball and run the tarball. The purpose of them being in the Autotest tree is just a simple and convenient way for you to run under Autotest, but in most cases you can just go to a directory, uncompress the tarball, and run the test yourself.
I specifically mean like the stuff to install guests, the stuff that interacts with the monitor, the stuff that tests hot plug. Like in theory, in fact it's probably not all that difficult. You can split out that into just an executable that you could interact with directly.
Sure.
Right? Because what I really want is I want to be able to do that, and I want to be able to do -- CD-ROM and pass it an ISO directly. I mean, one of the things that I think makes KVM Autotest hard to use is the fact that you have to use everything through Autotest, and Autotest is really oriented towards QA, not towards developers. So I wonder if you split out the tests, made them standalone, if that would help make it more consumable.
Yeah. Well, see, when you're looking at the, for example, guest install case, we have an utility that does that for tests, which is virt install. So I'm not sure whether splitting out the guest installing part for KVM Autotest would actually help, because our design is really integrated. But in fact, KVM Autotest, you are not obligated to use all parts of it. In the worst case scenario, you are obligated to use the client part. You are not supposed to, you don't need to use the server and the web interface and all that stuff. You can just use the client. So that said, and also we have heavily the dependency on the concept of the environment file. So yeah, maybe.
I guess what Anthony is trying to say is actually what we are trying to achieve, but it might not be possible through that straight route. Like the KVM Autotest tests themselves, they heavily depend, as Lucas was saying, on the environment and also on a bunch of libraries. Like the tests themselves mostly follow methods of this framework that we have. So actually, we want to be able to let you just choose the test you want to run without depending on the other stuff. But probably we see that it's not like a simple matter of moving the test from inside Autotest to inside KVM Autotest out to the Autotest only level.
Because ideally, I don't want like a menu to help me build a config file. I want an executable that I launch, and then it runs the test. Like I want the KVM-Autotest- hot plug.
Yeah, but to some extent, that's already how it happens. You have to execute the Autotest client. It's client / Autotest -- verbose and your control file. Ultimately, that's what you need to run KVM Autotest. It just happens to be all wrapped on this whole set of libraries. But yeah, I don't know exactly.
Also, many of the tests on KVM Autotest take a running virtual machine and try to do stuff. So I don't know how what you're thinking about would involve getting a running virtual machine or creating a new one, or what is use case if you think about.
I mean, you could certainly
make much part of the framework of KVM Autotest related to that, to keep virtual machines running and see what's running, what's not, and communicate with virtual machines. So I don't know if...
Yeah, we have another framework that called libvirt. So you could pass the name of a libvirt.
Well, about libvirt, someone asked, I think it was Juan that asked the question, hey, are you using libvirt? Why are you duplicating this? So it's very simple. We are testing the low-level bits of KVM. Some guys who are running KVM under Solaris or Open Solaris, they're not using libvirt, and moreover, it's important to have at least some test code that deals with KVM and QEMU KVM, and we have a libvirt Autotest in the making. We have a working prototype of it, and we have refactored the whole KVM Autotest code to expose all the libraries, so you can implement your own libvirt Autotest test, KVM2 Autotest test, and whatever. So we try to make it easier. The person just have to write another VM backend for it. So I still think it's important to have KVM Autotest our own stuff that deals only with QEMU and don't interact on libvirt. That is being written right now. So
Just as the Lumos guys, I love that. I just echo that sentiment. That having the ability to test QEMU in absent libvirt is absolutely huge, I think. And it also helps you separate out when you do have failures. It helps you separate out a libvirt failure from an underlying failure. It allows for better testing.
So yeah. Yeah, when someone brought, when Juan brought this, that's it. We still need to test the low level infrastructure parts of KVM, and so KVM Autotest is still relevant, still necessary.
Is there anything x86 specific about Autotest, or is it completely target independent? I mean, I'm interested in power architecture and.
Yeah, we're not doing anything that is actually Alexander Graf is running KVM Autotest on his power experimentation, so. It's not dependent.
Do you have any mechanism for test agents from the host and the guest to communicate?
So we have a lot of instrumentation to do all sorts of stuff in the host side and the guest side. You can, for example, you can boot a Windows VM and execute commands on that Windows VM. So it's very rich. It has a very rich API and does a lot of stuff.
Does it go through the socket, or what is the meaning?
Well, most of the time we rely on SSH communication. We expect that the guest has working network, but you can also interact using the serial port of the VM and run commands through that port, but that's only for Linux guests. Does that answer your question?
Yes, sir. There's some network test where we would want to have communication going on even when the network interface is down.
Yeah, you could do that by serial console. Okay. What else? All right, guys. Thank you very much.